Welcome back to Tell Me More Stories Told as Podcast. Today,
Yes.
we are diving deep
Okay.
into September 11th, 2001,
Right.
a day that
Yeah,
obviously changed the world as we know it.
definitely.
We're going to be looking at reports, personal accounts,
Okay.
really trying to go beyond just the headlines.
Yeah,
Very.
it's hard to even grasp the
Yeah.
complexity of that day.
I think so too. And I think that's why we're here.
Yeah.
So to understand what happened, we kind of have to
Okay.
rewind the clock a little bit.
Okay.
Go back further than the towers falling.
Right.
Back to 1996, actually.
Okay.
This is when Osama bin Laden
Mm-hmm.
issued a fatwa against the United States.
Yes.
Fatwa.
Mm-hmm.
For those of us who,
Yeah.
don't study Islamic law.
Sure.
So you break that down.
So basically, you can think of it as like a religious ruling
Okay.
or a decree. It carries a lot of weight. But this fatwa, it was a little different because he wasn't just targeting American soldiers. He was demanding that all Americans leave Saudi Arabia.
So not even just like a Western presence.
Right.
He's saying like all Americans.
Right.
Civilians included.
Everyone.
Wow. So this wasn't just some like military conflict in his eyes.
No.
This was a clash of civilizations.
Exactly.
And some argue that his insistence on removing U.S. troops from Saudi Arabia
Right.
actually paved the way for targeting civilians later on.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Right.
It's a very interesting thought.
Yeah.
So you're saying that maybe having American troops in the Holy Land
Mm-hmm.
was actually like a
Right.
stronger motivator for al-Qaeda
Potentially.
than just having like
A presence.
a presence?
Yes.
Because then they would have been able to.
Well, the theory is that
Yeah.
removing the troops could have actually weakened al-Qaeda's ability
Okay.
to rally support
For attacks.
for attack.
But, bin Laden was a
Of course.
master manipulator.
Right.
So who knows?
He could have twisted anything to fit.
It's chilling to think about. So we have this escalating tension
Yeah.
in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
But were there any, like, concrete signs?
Oh, yeah.
Any specific plots before 9/11 that pointed to what was coming?
Absolutely. 1995, there's a plot called Bojinka.
Bojinka.
Involved multiple planes
Okay.
being hijacked and crashed.
Multiple
Planes
planes.
to iconic buildings across Asia.
So the idea of using planes as weapons was already on their radar.
Yes.
Wow.
And you know what? The World Trade Center was actually one of the intended targets in Bojinka.
Oh, wow. That's
Yeah,
that's unsettling to hear.
it is. But thankfully, the plot was foiled.
Right.
But here's the chilling part.
Okay.
Al-Qaeda used the failures of Bojinka
Okay.
to refine their tactics for 9/11.
It's like they saw it as a dress rehearsal almost.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
A way to like perfect their plan. What specific changes did they make?
Well, they realized that they needed more highly trained pilots.
Okay.
They also adjusted their target list
Hmm.
and modified the explosives they were going to use.
Wow. So they were learning,
Learning.
adapting,
Yeah,
becoming more dangerous.
absolutely.
It's a lot to process.
It is.
This date, September 11th,
Yeah.
was that chosen at random?
Not at all.
Yeah.
Bin Laden chose it for a very specific reason.
Okay.
It was the anniversary of the Battle of Vienna in 1683.
I have to admit I'm not familiar with that.
It was a major battle
Okay.
where the Islamic Ottoman Empire
Okay.
was decisively defeated by European forces.
Okay.
For bin Laden, it symbolized the decline of Islamic power
Okay.
and the West's triumph.
So he intended 9/11 to be an act of revenge.
Yes.
Like a turning point in history, just like the Battle of Vienna.
turning point. He was obsessed with symbolism,
Okay.
with striking at the heart of America's
Wow.
power and prestige.
This is where things take a really dark turn.
Yes.
Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this deep dive into 9/11 on Tell Me More.
Mm-hmm.
Because now we're getting into the missed signals,
Right.
the intelligence failures that allowed this tragedy to happen.
Yeah.
And that's where things get really disturbing.
It is pretty unbelievable, but the CIA actually knew about two of the hijackers
Hold on.
before they even set foot in the United States.
They knew.
They did.
How is that possible?
So their names were Khalid al-Midhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi.
Okay.
In early 2000, they attended a meeting in Malaysia
Okay.
with known al-Qaeda operatives.
Yeah.
The CIA was monitoring that meeting.
They had eyes on these guys. So they had their names, their faces, everything.
They did.
Why weren't they apprehended?
Well, that's where the system really broke down.
Okay.
So the CIA's Alex Station, which was specifically focused on...
Hold on. Alex Station.
Yeah.
I'm not up on all the acronyms. Can you clarify?
Of course. So Alex Station was a unit within the CIA dedicated to tracking and analyzing al-Qaeda's activities.
Okay.
They were the ones who had al-Mitar and al-Hazmi on their radar.
Okay.
But back then, there was a strict wall between intelligence agencies like the CIA and law enforcement agencies like the FBI.
So the intelligence community and law enforcement.
Exactly.
Okay.
But wouldn't that hinder
You would think. Right.
communication and cooperation?
You would think.
Weren't there protocols in place to prevent these kinds of breakdowns?
You would think, but the reality was the intelligence community was still operating under a Cold War mindset.
I see.
They were used to dealing with, nation-state threats,
Right.
not decentralized terrorist networks.
Like al-Qaeda.
Like al-Qaeda.
So literally the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing.
Exactly.
Wow.
And tragically, it didn't stop there. That same year, the CIA discovered that Mihar had a U.S. visa.
What?
But again, that critical piece of information wasn't shared.
With the FBI.
The FBI.
It's almost like a chain reaction of missed opportunities. They could have put him on a watch list, flagged his passport, all these things.
Absolutely. If that information had been shared, it's very possible that the 9/11 attacks could have been prevented.
That's a heavy thought.
It is.
It really highlights the importance of communication and cooperation.
It does.
Especially when you're dealing with a threat
Right.
as complex and as elusive as terrorism.
Indeed. And these missed signals, these intelligence failures, they paint a really disturbing picture of just how unprepared the United States was for an attack of this magnitude.
So now we're in the summer of 2001. Tensions are rising.
Yeah.
The intelligence community is getting all these fragmented reports.
Right.
Whispers of an imminent attack.
Whispers.
But no one's able to connect the dots.
Imagine you're a counterterrorism official.
Right.
In July 2001.
Okay.
You're hearing this chatter about a major attack, possibly on U.S. soil.
Yeah.
But the specifics are vague, elusive.
Yeah.
You're trying to piece together this puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces.
Right.
The pressure must have been immense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then that fateful Tuesday morning arrived.
September 11, 2001.
It began like any other day.
It did.
But by 8:46 a.m. Eastern Time, everything changed.
Everything.
American Airlines Flight 11, en route from Boston to Los Angeles, crashes into the North Tower of the World Trade Center.
Wow.
The world watches in disbelief, struggling to comprehend what's unfolding before their eyes.
Just 17 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175, also from Boston, slams into the South Tower.
Oh, my gosh.
At this point, there's no doubt.
This is a coordinated attack.
Yeah.
An act of terror.
And then almost an hour later, American Airlines Flight 77 crashes into the Pentagon.
The symbol of American military might is breached.
It's just this whirlwind of chaos and terror.
It is.
The images, the sounds, the stories seared into our collective memory.
Collective memory.
But amidst the horror, there's one flight, United Airlines Flight 93, that stands out. It was delayed taking off.
Right.
A delay that would have profound consequences.
Ironically, that delay gave the passengers time to learn about the other attacks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
They knew what was happening.
And they knew.
They knew what their fate likely was.
They did.
And they chose to fight back.
They chose to fight back.
The passengers and crew of Flight 93 stormed the cockpit, preventing the hijackers from reaching their intended target, which is believed to be the U.S. Capitol building.
Wow. Their courage, their selflessness prevented even greater loss of life.
It did.
It's a powerful testament to the human spirit.
Powerful.
Even in the face of unimaginable terror.
Their story is one of incredible bravery.
Yeah.
And amidst all this tragedy, there were also incredible stories of survival.
Of course.
From the towers.
Right.
People who escaped from the floors below the impact, who made it down those seemingly endless stairwells, who helped each other through the smoke and debris.
I remember reading about a man who was working in the South Tower.
Right.
And he looked out his office window and saw the plane coming straight at him.
Can you even imagine
No.
witnessing something like that?
It's just
And he
unfathomable.
miraculously managed to dive under his desk
Wow.
just as the plane hit.
Wow.
He was thrown across the room by the impact,
Yeah.
but survived.
One of the lucky ones.
One of the very lucky ones.
And speaking of the South Tower, it actually collapsed first, even though it was hit second.
That's a great question.
Why is that?
It seems counterintuitive.
Yeah.
But it has to do with the way the plane struck the South Tower.
Okay.
It hit a lower floor
Okay.
and at a sharper angle,
Okay.
causing more structural damage.
So even though the North Tower was hit first and burned longer,
Right.
the South Tower was more severely compromised
Precisely.
from the start.
The impact of Flight 175
Yeah.
created a much more uneven distribution of weight,
Okay.
which ultimately contributed to the South Tower's earlier collapse.
It's these details that you don't always hear about
Right.
that really give you a deeper understanding of the events of that day.
They do.
But as we know, the story of 9/11 doesn't end
No.
with the collapse of the towers.
No.
The real aftermath, the long-term consequences,
Right.
those are perhaps
Yeah.
the most significant and lasting aspects
The most significant.
of this tragedy.
Yes.
And that's what we'll explore next.
That's what we'll explore. The collapse of the towers, was just the beginning
Right.
of a long and painful journey.
Yeah.
The human cost of 9/11, it extended far beyond just those who perished that day.
You're talking about the long-term health impacts.
Exactly, especially
fine.
for the first responders who
Yeah.
rushed into those burning buildings.
Of course.
And the people who lived and worked near Ground Zero.
Right.
Yeah. The dust cloud that engulfed lower Manhattan
Right.
after the towers fell.
Yeah.
It wasn't just dust.
Right.
It was a toxic mix of pulverized concrete,
Wow.
asbestos, lead,
Yeah.
all sorts of other hazardous materials.
I remember seeing images of people covered in that dust,
Yeah.
struggling to breathe.
Yeah. It's hard to believe
It's hard to believe.
that anyone could survive that.
Yeah. And many did survive the initial impact,
Right.
but they were exposed to these toxins.
They were exposed. We're
Right.
talking about thousands of people.
Yeah.
Firefighters, police officers, construction workers, residents
Wow.
who breathed in that air,
Right.
who lived and worked in that environment
Yeah.
for weeks, months after the attack.
And a lot of those health problems didn't
Yeah.
surface right away.
For many people, no, they thought they were okay.
Right.
And then years later, they started experiencing, respiratory problems, developing cancers,
No.
struggling with a whole range of chronic illnesses
Yeah.
directly linked to their exposure to
Right.
that toxic dust.
It's heartbreaking to think that
It is.
even in their efforts to help to rebuild,
Yeah.
they were unknowingly putting their health at risk.
And what's even more tragic is
Yeah.
that the government initially downplayed those risks.
Really?
Yeah, they were so focused on showing the world
Okay.
that America wouldn't be defeated
Right.
that they rushed to get the city back on its feet.
Right. But in doing so, they failed to protect.
The very people.
Who were most vulnerable?
It's a complex situation.
It is.
There were so many factors at play.
Right.
The scale of the disaster,
Of course.
the desire for normalcy,
Yeah.
the lack of understanding
Yeah.
about the long-term health effects.
Yeah.
But it's a stark reminder that even with the best intentions,
Right.
responding to a tragedy of this magnitude
Yeah.
is incredibly difficult.
It really is. And it raises questions about accountability as well.
It does.
Were those in power
Yeah.
held responsible for their actions,
Right.
for the decisions that put people's lives at risk?
That's a debate that continues to this day. There have
Yeah.
been lawsuits,
Sure.
investigations,
Yeah.
a lot of finger pointing.
Right.
But
Yeah.
ultimately, there's
Yeah.
no easy answer.
No. And beyond the human cost, 9/11 also led to this massive
Yes.
overhaul of domestic security
Huge.
in the United States.
Yeah.
The creation of the Department of Homeland Security,
Yeah.
the passage of the Patriot Act.
Monumental.
These were huge changes.
Monumental shifts in how we approach security and surveillance.
Right.
The Patriot Act in particular
Yeah.
expanded the government's powers
Right.
to collect information on its own citizens,
Right.
all in the name of preventing future attacks.
I remember when the Patriot Act was passed, there was so much debate,
There was.
so much concern about
Yeah,
erosion of civil liberties.
of course.
It felt like this turning point
It did.
where we had to weigh the balance between security and freedom.
That tension, that struggle to find the right balance
Yeah.
is something we're still grappling with today.
It's true.
The Patriot Act gave the government this broad authority to conduct surveillance, to access personal records, to detain suspects without trial.
It's a slippery slope.
It is, where do we draw the line between keeping people safe and protecting their fundamental rights?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
That is the million-dollar question, and it's not one with an easy answer. You know, in the aftermath of 9/11, there was this sense of urgency. This willingness to sacrifice some freedoms for the promise of security.
Of course. But looking back, was it worth it? Did these measures actually make us safer?
Yeah.
Or did they simply create a climate of fear and suspicion?
Those are questions that historians and legal scholars are still debating.
I bet.
What's undeniable is that the Patriot Act had a profound impact on American society, shaping our relationship with the government and raising fundamental questions about privacy and surveillance in the digital age.
And the impact of 9/11 wasn't confined to America's borders either.
No, it wasn't. It led to the invasion of Afghanistan, the toppling of the Taliban regime that had harbored al-Qaeda.
And then, of course, there was the war in Iraq.
Yes.
Which, while more controversially linked to the war on terror, had a profound impact on the region and on America's standing in the world.
The ripple effects of 9/11 were felt globally. It led to increased military spending, heightened security measures at airports and public spaces.
Of course.
A more militarized approach to foreign policy.
It's easy to focus on the immediate aftermath.
It is.
You know, the images of those towers falling.
Yes.
The stories of heroism and loss.
Yes.
But it's crucial to remember that the consequences of that day continue to shape our world.
They do.
In profound ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the war on terror.
Yeah.
The rise of surveillance.
Yeah.
The debates about civil liberties and the limits of government power. These are all legacies of 9/11.
All legacies.
That we're still wrestling with.
We are still wrestling with.
We've talked about the events leading up to 9/11, the failures that allowed it to happen. The day itself, and the immediate aftermath. But, as we've been discussing, the consequences of that day are still unfolding.
They are.
They're woven into the fabric of our lives in ways we may not even fully realize.
It's true.
Yeah.
The world fundamentally shifted.
It did.
After 9/11.
Yeah.
The way we travel, the way we communicate, the way we think about security and risk. It all changed.
It all changed. And then there's the emotional toll.
Yeah.
You know, the trauma, the grief, the sense of vulnerability that lingered long after the dust settled.
We can't underestimate the psychological impact of 9/11, not just for those who were directly affected, but for the entire nation, to the world.
For the world, yeah.
It shattered our sense of security, leaving a scar on the collective psyche.
It's like a wound that never fully heals.
It is.
It scabs over, but it can be easily reopened. By reminders, by anniversaries, by events that echo the trauma of that day.
And that trauma can manifest in many ways. Increased anxiety. Fear of public spaces. A heightened sense of suspicion and mistrust. It's something we need to acknowledge and address.
We do.
Both individually and as a society.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's also important to remember that the story of 9/11 isn't just about tragedy and loss.
It's not. It's also a story of resilience. Of courage, of the human spirit's ability to endure and rebuild.
Absolutely. In the face of unimaginable horror, we saw acts of incredible bravery.
Incredible bravery.
First responders risking their lives to save others, strangers, helping strangers.
Strangers helping strangers.
Communities coming together to support one another.
Absolutely. Those stories of hope and humanity are just as important as the stories of loss and pain.
I think so too.
They remind us that even in the darkest of times, there is light, there is strength, there is a capacity for love and compassion that can help us overcome even the most devastating challenges.
And as we move forward, it's so crucial that we learn from the past, that we acknowledge the mistakes that were made.
Acknowledge the mistakes.
That we strive to create a more just and equitable world. That we never forget the lessons of 9/11.
Never forget the lessons.
It's a tall order.
It is a tall order.
But it's one we can't afford to ignore. We can't. The stakes are too high.
You're right. The legacy of 9/11 is a complex one.
It is.
It's a story of loss.
Of course.
Of pain, of fear, but it's also a story of resilience, of courage, of hope.
And ultimately, it's up to us to decide
It is.
how we will shape that legacy.
It's up to us.
How we will remember the past, how we will learn from it, and how we will use those lessons
Absolutely.
to create a better future.
It's a responsibility we all share to honor the memory of those we lost.
Yeah.
By striving to create a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur.
That's a powerful thought to end on.
It is.
It's a reminder that even though 9/11 happened over 2 decades ago, its impact continues to resonate today.
It does.
And it's up to each of us
to
ensure that its legacy is one of hope, of healing.
Of hope, of healing.
And of a commitment to building a more peaceful and just world.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the legacy of 9/11. It's been a challenging but important conversation.
It has been.
Yes.
And to all our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic, to learn more about the events of that day.
Yes.
And to reflect on its lasting impact on our world. Thank you for listening to Tell Me More Stories Told as podcast. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
For another deep dive.